Hi everyone, thanks for joining today. Today, myself, Katie, the Customer Success Manager, and Mandy, our COO, are going to go over the income section and the means test section. So I posted a note in the chat. If you're having any audio issues, you can click on the Get Audio Video Help in the lower left corner and switch to compatibility mode. We also always automatically record these, and you can access them on the site right after they're finished. So if for some reason you're having any audio issues, just hop on after and you can watch. So I'll start by going through the income section. The difference between NextChapter and maybe some of the other software providers that you're used to is that you're only going to enter in the income in one spot. So you're not going to have to go re-enter everything once you get to means test. We're collecting the income tab. So to start, once you've entered in a majority of your information, in the income tab, you're going to have an employment section, a non-employment section, and then the gross yearly income. Employment and non-employment are feeding directly to Schedule I and the means test, and then the gross yearly income is just for that question on the sofa. But to start an employment income, you can start by selecting the type here. So there's going to be full or part-time employment, and then also self-employment. So all of the different options, as well as all of the different options in non-employment income, which they just correspond to the line on Schedule I that this information is going to. So if you want it to go as self-employment, it's going to go to a different line than business, professional, or farm. It just depends on where you want that in Schedule I, so just always note that you can put them in either spot. Something else to note is that even if you're in an individual case and you want to put in your non-filing spouse's income, select the type of income, and then within there, there's going to be an option to select whether it's the debtor or the spouse. So whether it's a filing spouse, a non-filing spouse, you can select this spouse option. You've told us what their marital status is. You've told us what type of case it is already, so we know what to do with that income. After that, there are three main ways to enter in the income. So the first option I'll show you is the one pay advice option. For this option, we just need to know how often your client is paid, and then we're going to take that just one pay advice and automatically do all of the math for you. So this is really great for a client who's paid rather consistently. Definitely if they're salaried, you would enter in their pay advice as well as their deductions. We'll take this gross amount. So we have $3,000 in here. You've told us that they're being paid twice monthly. So if you look in our calculator down here, we have that gross amount times 24 weeks divided by 12 months. So you can see exactly how we're getting that monthly gross income. We'll do the same exact thing for Schedule I, except Schedule I will account for all of the deductions. So all of these deductions, here's your net income, again, twice a month, so times 2, and that's what you'll see on Schedule I. A few other things you can do from editing the income source. Each type of income will, if you hover over the orange question mark, it'll give you an overview of, just what type of situation to use that type of income for, but you can click on all of them too. That's going to take you directly to our Help Center, and the Help Center is going to walk you through step by step how to use, in this case, the All Pay Advices option, and it'll give examples with actual figures in there, so that's always helpful too. And then at the bottom here, there's another, it's just going to keep taking you to more information about income. And those are super helpful in addition to this calculator on here. Something else that we have is when you're adding employment, you can save these as a common company. So the common company option is going to work just like common creditors, where as you start to type it in, for example, FedEx, let's say this is a common company you use often, type in the name, all of the address and information is already in there. The next option on here is a year-to-date option. So this option is really great in two scenarios. So let's say first your debtor is paid kind of all over the place. we would just need the first pay advice from the last 6 months and the last pay advice from the last 6 months. We give you suggested dates up here. So if you're filing this case right now in July, we're telling you you should probably get the first advice from January and the last advice from June. There are options in here to pick dates. So maybe when you come in, 6 months from now and you don't remember exactly what dates these advices were, that can be helpful in keeping track. I don't want anything in there right now. And then we'll automatically take this difference, so the 16,700 minus the 980, and you can see that in our calculator again up here. We'll take that difference, divide by 6 months, and there is your monthly gross income. This option, if they're still employed, we'll still need you to add a pay advice for Schedule I. We need those deductions. The deductions are going to the means test as well of Schedule I, and then that net income for I. So we will ask you to put in at least one pay advice. If you know exactly what you want Schedule I to say, there's nowhere directly you can just go type on I. What you can do is just set the pay period as monthly. So anytime, if you look at this Schedule I calculation right here, anytime you have this set to monthly, there's no math we need to do. This is exactly what's going on I. But let's say, again, they're paid twice monthly. We'll still take that one pay advice, do the calculations, and now we have our net income too. If you have a debtor that is no longer employed, this is a really great option to use, and you just wouldn't put a pay advice for I because they're no longer employed. So let's say we check the box, they're no longer employed, put in the amount that they've made in the last 6 months, and then we'll just take that and divide by 6 for the means test. As you can see, as soon as you check that no longer employed box up here, nothing's going on I. The third option in here is the all pay advices option. So this option is going to ask you to enter in all pay advices received in the last 6 months. We will average out everything for the means test. It is not going to average for Schedule I right now. So I'll show you kind of a workaround for that and how you can still put whatever you want on Schedule I. But for this one, it's going to ask you for dates. So this date field received on isn't going anywhere. It's just helping us make sure that they actually were paid this amount in the last 6 months. So you will need to put in a date for this field. And then you can go through and put in their income, their deductions. If it remains relatively similar, to reduce the data entry you have to do, there is a duplicate option in here. So you can duplicate pay advices. They'll go to the bottom of the list. And now we can say, okay, that was duplicated, and here's what we're making in May. Maybe it was $800. So now you don't have to, just save yourself a ton of entering in all these deductions and everything all over again. What we do for this, and make sure on this page, this is one of those pages, income, where you do need to hit save and close. Do not enter in everything and then accidentally X out of this screen. It does not automatically save. So once you hit save and close, it updates right away. The all pay advices option, we will automatically use the most recent pay advice for Schedule I. So as you can see here, this recent pay advice with the $800 and the dollar and overtime, so $801.32, that's where you're seeing this gross bi-monthly income. So if you do not want to use the most recent on Schedule I, in any of the advices that you have entered, you can click Use on I. So now we're using this one on Schedule I. You see our calculator updated here. It's now including this income and overtime for the gross monthly. So you can select that option for any of them. If you don't want to use any of these, what you could do is enter in a pay advice and date it something in the future that's outside of the last 6 months. So now if I put in September 1st of 2018, a date that is forward looking and hasn't happened yet, it kind of tricks the system into thinking that's the most recent advice because that's the latest date in here. And then it's outside of your 6 months, so it's not going to do anything to your means test. So that's an easy way that you could kind of come in here and just do whatever you want on I. Another thing that's feeding into these dates as well, Whenever you file through NextChapter, your in client profile filing information, a filing date's going to be entered in here. So if you file today and it's July, when you come back in here in December, this date will be locked in, and you'll notice in the income section, it's still going to show you January through June. So if you're working on an old case, you could always come in and maybe are amending something. You could change the filing date to anything you wanted, and that will affect the 6 months that are showing in this income tab. At any time too, you can click on this orange preview option at the top right. It's going to take you straight to Schedule I so long as you're in the income section. And then you can just see how the forms are generating. So it'll show you, there's all of our employment information. There's our gross income, all of the deductions, what the monthly income is. And like I mentioned earlier, if you're putting self-employment on here, it's going to go to a different line than, let's say, if you were doing business, professional, or farm. That starts to go into the 8A. And then, so that's how you can get those in other lines if you want them. Down here too is just a helpful table. It's going to show you the gross income by month. So it'll show you what you've entered in per month. And then it's going to average all of those out by 6. So that's where we're getting that monthly gross figure. Moving on to non-employment income, these work the same. They're just going to depend on the lines on Schedule I. So if you want to take a look at Schedule I and see exactly where you want this to go, whether you want it to go in as maybe other, and you can specify what it is. So anything added as other income here is going to have a box where you can type in whatever you want. Maybe it's pension income. So anything like that, just it's going to correlate to the line that it belongs to. There are things in here too, like Social Security. So we automatically, when you add Social Security, we are automatically deducting this, or not deducting this, excluding this from the means test, per the means test instructions. So things like that, it's really important to pick the correct type of income in here. Like I mentioned, if you do other income, this is where you can type whatever you want, and that's going to go directly on 8H. Once you've selected the income source, you still have the same 3 ways of entering income, whether it's all the advices, just one, or a year to date, and you still pick the frequency. The only difference would be you have the option in here to exclude from I. So if you don't want this on I, you can click that box. And then 2, it's going to ask you the gross receipts and business expenses. So it's not quite as detailed as the income that you're entering in the employment income section, but you can still delete things, duplicate them, use specific ones on I, and like I said, exclude from I. If you've already started it in here, you can still change the type so that you don't have to delete it and re-enter it all over again. Just come change the type. It'll update to the correct line on Schedule I. These 2 will automatically, so if there was income down here, it'll automatically add the income by month when you get to the expenses. So if you ever see like it's higher than what it is in employment income, there's probably just non-employment income too, and it's including that in the expenses calculator. The last portion of the income section would be the gross yearly income. So this, like I said earlier, is for the SOFA. On the SOFA, it tells you to combine all of your yearly income. So that's why you're not going to see multiple options for adding an income. They don't ask anywhere for you to specify what type it is. So you won't see that anywhere, but that's differing from non-employment income because the forms do have a line for the source. So all you need to do is add new non-employment income, and then you can put the amounts and the sources, and those will show on the SOFA. So I'm going to pass it on to Mandy now, and she'll kind of show you how all of that income filters into your means test.
Okay, so I'm going to start. I'm going to hop back into the income here. So Katie talked about how we are using this income that you're entering depending on the type that you select. into Schedule I and to the means test. So we're using that gross 6-month income, depending on how you've entered it here. Another thing that we do is we actually use the expenses from your debtor's employee pay. So if I go to the all pay advices option here, when you enter in all of the deductions from the pay advice, some of these can apply into the means test as well. So what we will do is we will take them and calculate the monthly expenses based on how often they're paid here. And the system will default to using the same pay advice that's being used for Schedule I. So in this scenario here, we don't have any other pay advice marked to use a different pay advice. So like Katie said, it's going to default to using the most recent pay advice for Schedule I. So for things such as the taxes, health savings account, any mandatory retirement fees that come out of the debtor's pay, we'll take those, calculate the monthly amount, put those into the means test, and then you'll also have the option to review those when I get into the means test questions here, and you can override them and change them if needed. But we try to pull this information from here to hopefully save you some time. So as I mentioned, NextChapter uses the most recent pay advice. We look at what a majority of the courts accept, which is the income should be the last 6-month average, and then the deduction should be forward-looking, so what the debtor is currently having taken out of their pay. But we do know that some courts and some judges and trustees prefer to see the last 6 months for the deductions in addition to the pay. So everything should be backwards looking on the means test. If your jurisdiction is one of those exceptions, we have the option up here for you to check the box to use the 6-month average for the deductions as well. So if I select this here, now it's going to take all of those deductions entered from the last full 6 months, divide out by 6 to put those figures into the means test for me. This is kind of an override option because, again, a majority of the courts don't want it to be this way, but I did want to point out that we do have this option here. So you could have that average added in. And even if I didn't want to use the average, I still have the option to override any of these figures in here as well, again, later on in the means test section. So once we have in the income, I wanted to briefly talk about the expenses. When you go through your expenses, you'll see this orange dot next to some items because we are asking for expenses, the monthly expense that's used in Schedule J, and some of them are also used in the means test. So just like we do with the deductions on the pay advice, we're going to pull these over from here, assuming, let's say, for example, one of these would be the charity, the daycare babysitter. So this is a figure that goes into Schedule J. If you had a situation where you want to show what they're currently paying, but you want a different amount used for the last 6 months into your means test, I can keep the $450 here. And here, when I go down in a little bit, I'll see that figure again and I can change it. So the amounts that you have here will go into Schedule J. And if it's an amount that's used in both Schedule J and the means test, you would want to leave it the amount for J in the expenses section. And then later on in the means test questions, you'll have the option to override and change that if you want to. So we're just pulling it over here to, hopefully save you a little bit of time, but you still have the ability to change that if needed. So in the means test questions, if your case is a Chapter 7 and there is an exemption from the presumption of abuse, you would indicate whether they are, if it's for either of these reasons. So if they're a disabled veteran, a reservist, National Guard member. If I say yes to any of these questions, I'll have a couple more questions I need to answer. But this is what's going to go on to the form 122A1. It's a supplemental form. So if I have no selected on these, and these only apply in a Chapter 7 case, but if I have no selected and I preview the forms, this form won't be included because this doesn't indicate any of the exemptions for these. The other qualification for this exemption would be back in the client profile. If you indicate under filing information that the nature of the debt is primarily business, that's another exemption. So if you have this selected, or if you indicate any of the other exemptions apply, then this information is going to generate this supplemental form. You'll see it in the preview, you'll see it when you download, and then it'll actually update the means test form in a Chapter 7 case to reflect that there is an exemption, that nothing applies, and there will be no figures added onto it because it's not necessary per the form's instructions. So sometimes people get a little confused by that. They'll have one of these marked, or they'll have that the debt is primarily business, and then when they preview, they'll see that their means test form has no figures on it, and that's because it doesn't apply. And then if they look one form down, they'll see the supplemental forms being included, and that's what we would file in the case for you. So if you do need to complete the means test, you would want to start here in the means test qualifier. And this is a nice thing. I know a lot of attorneys will do this in the beginning stages of working on a case with the client as well. So if you wanted to kind of quickly get a qualifier while you're working with the debtor, the required information for this section is we do need to know how many people live in the household. We do need to have a means test income. So either you could add in the income section just one pay advice at a monthly amount to give an average to give yourself a quick qualifier. Or you could have the income completely added in, but the income is required for us to calculate this. And then the other thing we need to know too is where the debtor lives, their residential state. So if I go into client profile, the debtor address, I do need to have at least one address here that is marked as residential so that we can use that state for the median family income. And then in the debtor profile section, that's where I can indicate how many people live in the household. So that's just the minimum information you need to complete so that we can conduct that qualifier to initially see if there's going to be a presumption of abuse based on their annual income. So once you have that information, at the top, you're going to see the debtor's income. So that's the monthly, and then we calculate the annual for you. And then below is the median figure. So for the state of Ohio, 4 people, the median income is about $85,000. And in this scenario, because our debtor's income is higher, we see a red thumbs down. And then there's instructions to continue on to the means test questions, which is the next section here. If our debtor's income was lower than the median family income, we would see a green thumbs up. We would see instructions that would say no need to complete the means test. And then if I were to click on the means test questions, it would actually say no need to complete it. All of these questions would be omitted. So you don't need to worry about that. And the next part doesn't matter as well. If you have that green thumbs up, you're only going to have the first form in the means test. So either the 122A1 or 122C1, and you won't see the additional form because it's not needed. We would indicate on the form there is no presumption of abuse. We would check the appropriate box, and then that additional form is not going to be in the preview. It won't be when you download or when you file the case either. So again, every once in a while we get questions about that. If it's not going to be filed, we're not going to confuse people and include that in there if it's not necessary. But in this scenario, we do need to continue on to add in any additional deductions and to review the deductions that are being pulled from the income and expenses. So really the best way to do this is to go through the means test questions, and it's really in your debtor's best interest to be diligent and read through each one of these to see if there are any additional deductions that apply. So for example, if the spouse isn't filing and if there's any income reported that's not used for the household, this can be added here and then you can specify, and then that's going to go directly into the form. The next question is probably the most important question on this page, because if you do not complete this question here, and if you click to view the means test form, none of the figures are going to be filled out. Because with this question, we can determine how many people live in the household that can be claimed as exemptions on the tax returns that are under 65 and over 65. So some people will get kind of confused and think, well, I already told, in the client profile that there were 5 people that live in this household. But we need to know their ages under and over here. So that's why you have to specify a little bit further. This is what we're using to calculate the IRS standards and then the local standards as well. So we can't calculate those unless these are completed. It is required. Next, if you have any vehicles added, we will add this automatically for you to the number of vehicles for the ownership or operating expenses. If you had a vehicle maybe that wasn't listed in personal property, maybe it was a non-filing spouse's expense and your court allows that, or they allow an additional deduction that does occur in some other jurisdictions as well, you can change this number to the number of vehicles. So it will default to what's in NextChapter, but it can be adjusted. And then if you want to add an additional amount, I know some jurisdictions allow you an extra 150. You can add that in here, and then that's going to go onto that corresponding line in the means test. And then again, going through answering if there's any additional expenses here, and you can specify. We pull over the health savings account expense if there was any from the pay advice. So the $100 is the monthly amount. I can override this if I'd like. These figures here all correspond. In the forms, they total, and then it asks if you spend this total amount. So the health insurance we pull over, the health savings account we pull over from the pay advices, and I can add them directly in here too if it's something that's not on the pay advice. If there's any disability insurance, you would need to add that directly in here. It's going to total the 3 of those. And then here I can indicate if they're actually not paying this total amount, you can change that. So those expenses kind of all go together and get totaled there, and you need to indicate if they do or don't spend that total amount. Here's just some additional expenses that we're not pulling from anywhere for the energy cost, but we do pull if you have an additional expense for a child under 18, the total amount per child is that $160.42. We do keep these figures updated with the current IRS standards. And then when you have all those here, if you do want to take the maximum for the food and clothing expenses, that's going to be 5%. And you can see how that's calculating down here. You can mark that, and most people do just choose to take the maximum. Next, when you come here to the override options, these are going to be, the first one is going to be the expenses that I was showing you back in the income section and the expenses. So it's best, I would say, even if you don't necessarily need to override, I think it's a good double check to click yes here, because what that's going to do, it's going to pull up all of those expenses that NextChapter was able to pull from other spots in the application. So we've got the top portion is going to be everything pulled from the pay advice being used. And then the rest are going to be any of the monthly expenses that you listed in the expense section. So again, if I want to show that that they are currently paying $450, but on the means test, they were actually paying $550, I can indicate that here. Oops. Updating this amount here only updates it in the means test. It does not change the figure back in the expense section. So if I was actually trying to change the daycare babysitter cost in Schedule J, I need to actually go back into expenses and change it there. And it would actually update it in both places unless I had this override selected. So if you only want to update it in the means test, that's what you would do in this section here. One thing I want to point out with the taxes, this is showing the monthly amount for the taxes that's being deducted from the debtor's pay. If the debtor has, if you have listed in Schedule AB, so in the personal property, money owed to debtor, if you had that there is a refund expected to be paid for the taxes, this amount here would actually be divided by 12 and deducted from the expense that you're showing on the means test. Because essentially we would be, the forms indicate that any funds that are expected to be owed has to kind of go against the debtor on those. So if you come in and you see that the amount has been adjusted and you're not sure why that is adjusted, when clearly the taxes show they're coming out of the pay at X amount, check and see if there's an expected tax refund. Because that is a part of the form's instructions. So that's what we do in NextChapter. We do reduce that amount out. And if for some reason that's not going to apply, or you do have an exception for that case, then by all means, you still can go into the means test questions and override that if needed. So once you go through these, you have any overrides, or if you're happy with any of these figures, and select OK, that's what we're going to be applying into the case. And next, we have the options. Again, we automatically complete the ownership deduction and then healthcare expenses. If you want to change that, you certainly can. for multiple vehicles, you can add this in, and that's going to change it into the system. For the most part, these are going to be more one-off situations, or if your jurisdiction has a little bit different expectations for them, but this is kind of, generally you won't need these. And let me adjust this real quick. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, so next we have down here, when you add in any secured liens for homes or vehicles, we will show those in this section here for your future payments due on debts in 60 months. If you add any arrearages, those are going to get added into the cure amount here. And then we're automatically going to show you what that monthly amount looks like. So for this one, there's $2,000. So in 60 months, it'd be $33 to pay. You will need to add in any interest. So we do have the option for you to amortize by clicking on this tool here. So this will take you out of NextChapter, but it's a really simple tool to just put in the total loan amount, what the current interest rate is, and then if you want to put in 5 years, if you're going to do 60 months, that's going to calculate. You would just take that figure and then plug it back into the total future due. So that's why we have this little reminder here that we're pulling that amount straight over, but it doesn't include that interest. So if you want, to include that interest, put that in here, and that's what's going to go into the forms. It's important when we pull these over, we will have the type, but if for some reason, let's say you added the lien and it wasn't attached to the home at first, it is possible that you could come in here and this be blank. So if you're not seeing it going into the means test in the proper section, there's a section specifically for the home and for vehicles required. You can come here and update that, and it'll change where it goes in the program. And if any reason you don't want any of these included, you can simply omit. Again, it's more of a one-off situation, but the option is there. If you have the debtor has any priority claims owed for a DSO, for priority taxes, alimony, you can indicate, this will default to saying yes or no based on the type that you have, and then we'll show you the total amount of past due, and then you can change that too. So we're pulling this from the claims section up above in the unsecured priority claims. So it's pulling this $12,000 over because it's owed for taxes. So it'll do it automatically for you if you already have that entered in here, and you can override it if you need to. And then lastly, in this section, we do have for the Chapter 13 eligibility and the forms, it has the multiplier for your district. We do have these. We try to keep these updated, the multipliers, and actually, no, these are always updated. So your Chapter 13 trustee figures do vary when you're working on the actual calculator, but this figure is actually determined by the IRS. So when there's any update with the IRS figures, we do update these here. If for any reason you needed to override, though, you can do that. And then we've got links to those as well for the different positions on them if you'd like to use those. Once you have in your figures, we will recalculate again. We're going to add in those additional deductions. We're going to figure out the 60-month disposable income. And then if needed, you can add in any additional circumstances. So I could do the description and the amount and save as many of those as needed. And then if there's expected change in income or expenses that you want to be listed on the means test, you can add this in here too, indicate whether it's an increase or a decrease, the date of change, and that will add that onto the form. If you're working on a form, if you're working on a case that is being amended, it's already filed, and you actually need to come in and work on a different set of IRS figures or median family income figures like from the last year, you can go into the case, into the filing information, client profile, and on this question here, version of legal data applied in this case. So what this is, it's telling the system that I want to use the current IRS figures. If I'm going back to an older case and I want the system to revert to older figures, we have all of those stored in here. I would select prior, and then I would choose my date range that I want to go back to. And that's going to update those figures for me. But this defaults to current because it's assuming you want to use the current figures for that, but that option is available in there. Okay, I think that pretty much covers the means test and income. I don't see any questions in the chat here, but if you do have any additional questions as you go through, and if you're working on your first case, or you know, there's a lot of different scenarios with income, expenses, and means test. We've kind of slowly built as many scenarios and possibilities as we can over the past few years, but sometimes things come up. So if there's anything that you're not sure how to get it to work in NextChapter, feel free to reach out to us. We have our in-app chat. That's a great way to do that. And that also links you to our help center. So you may find answers to your questions in there too if someone else has already had that question. But otherwise, reach out to us. We'll be happy to help. And be sure to check out some of the upcoming webinars. We did schedule a few more. So if you click on the help link in NextChapter, there is an option to select on our webinars and to register for any of those. So that's it. Thank you.